Hi Parker Panthers, this is Mrs. Warren again. We're about to get into chapter 7. I want you to notice some things. I'm finding that Molly is not treating Guest as badly as she had before, that she's actually seeing that he has some good qualities and she's treating him like that. I also want you to notice the changes in Guest. He's walking, he's talking, so he's grown up a lot since they've gone and left for their trip in the Darklands to try to find the kind folks. Madog has been repeatedly helpful to Molly and Guest. We know that Madog and Guest have a connection because of the way they talk to each other, which is a different language than the language Molly speaks. And so I want you to keep on looking for that, how characters are changing, how they're relating differently to each other, and of course, if new characters come along, which you know they will. So we're going to get into chapter 7. I must have fallen asleep because when I opened my eyes, I was in the stone shelter, covered by blankets, warm and dry and safe. Madog tended the fire, and Guest sat beside him, chattering away in his odd caws and clicks. When Guest saw my eyes open, he said, "I told you not to go. You mooncalf, not me." Madog shook his head at Guest. "I think Molly knows she should have listened to you. Next time, perhaps she will." Guest thumped his chest. "I knows more than Molly mooncalf." "Oh, be quiet," I muttered. "You were just scared, that's all. You didn't know anything." Guest climbed into Madog's lap. "Molly mooncalf," he said, giving me his sly smile. I closed my eyes and gritted my teeth. Guest was the mooncalf, not me. But there he was sitting in Madog's lap, and here I was lying in a corner all by myself. Madog liked Guest better than me, just because he knew more about pukas than I did. It wasn't fair. When I woke up in the morning, I was still cross, which is another word for angry. If I hadn't been so hungry, I would have gone in search of the kind folk all by myself. Guest watched me from the other side of the fire, but I ignored him. The kind folk would never swap him for Thomas. How foolish of me to think they'd want a puny creature like him. Madog had gone out foraging and found a dozen duck eggs. Along with cheese and bread, they made a good meal. When we'd eaten, Madog said, "Now, I must go back to Port Riverton and settle a deal with a man and a horse." "Oh, don't go," I begged him. "What if the puka comes back? Or something even worse?" "If you remember what I told you, Molly, you'll come to no harm." Madog put his hands on my shoulders and looked into my eyes. "Trust no one except Guest. Listen to him. He knows more than you think, and certainly more than you know. He's part kind folk himself. But you know much more than he does. And you're stronger and you can tame pukas. What can a weak creature like Guest do to save me?" Madog looked at me closely. "Why can't you see Guest as anything but a hindrance?" A hindrance means something that gets in the way of something else. "Because that's what he is," I muttered. "He's been a hindrance since the day they left him in our garden. He ruined everything. Everything." I bit my lip hard to keep myself from crying. "And now you like him better than me just because he knew about the puka?" Madog reached out for Guest and pulled him closer. "If you two are going to find the kind folk and live to tell the story of it, you must get along with each other. Or at least try." He looked at Guest. "Promise me not to call Molly names?" Guest looked at me. "Yes, I do what you say. No more Molly mooncalf, and no more Guest mooncalf." Something in Guest's strange eyes told me he still thought I was a mooncalf. He just wouldn't say it out loud. "To me," Madog said, "and you, Molly, will you promise to listen to what Guest tells you? He was born in the Darklands. Knowledge of its ways runs in his veins." "I'll listen," I muttered, but I didn't say I'd believe Guest. Kind folk lied. If their blood ran in his veins, how was I to trust their changeling? Lifting his pack, Madog said, Pack up your things. We'll start out together, but in a few miles the path splits, and I'll go my way. We walked silently through the forest. Over our heads the branches of trees interlaced, blocking most of the light. The only birds I heard were crows quarreling with one another. Every step took us to the Darklands, and I was more afraid than I cared to admit. We stopped at a tilted signpost, furred with moss and lichens, pointing west to Port Riverton. This is where we part. My dog turned to the west. I take this way, and you take that. But nothing's written on the other side to show me where to go, I said. There's only one way to go, and that's straight ahead, my dog told me. We're at the border of the Darklands. One more step, and you'll be in their world and at their mercy. I didn't like the sound of "at their mercy." Can you at least tell me how much farther it is? It's impossible to say. I almost stamped my foot in vexation. Oh, that's a fine answer. Time and distance change here, Molly. One day, a certain place might be 10 miles away. Another day, it might be 100 miles away. Well, in Lower Hexham, what's 10 miles one day is 10 miles the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. But you're not in Lower Hexham, are you? No, but I wish I were. It's not too late to turn back. I took a deep breath, looked long and hard at him, and said, I came to fetch my brother. I won't go home without him. Oh, but you're a stubborn one, my dog said. Even if you find the kind folk, it's not likely they'll return Thomas. You don't know that for certain. What does anyone know for certain except that the sun will set tonight and come up tomorrow? He patted my shoulder. We can make good guesses, though. A guess is a guess. Mine is just as good as yours. My dog shook his head in disagreement and hoisted his pack higher. I must bid you farewell. He doffed his hat. Remember, Guest knows more about this place than you do, Molly. Listen to him and don't quarrel, which means argue. While we talked, Guest sat on the ground catching beetles and releasing them. Now he looked up at my dog, his eyes asquint. I stays on the path. He glanced at me and shook his head as if to say he had no control over what I might do. And so will I promised. All right then, good luck to you both, and be wary of all you meet on your way, my dog told us. In a panic, I took a step after him. Sorry about somebody either cutting the grass or blowing the grass or doing something, but that's the sound you hear in the background. Sorry, let me restart. Let's see. All right, good luck then to you both, and be wary of all you meet on your way, my dog told us. In a panic, I took a step after him. Will we see you again? My dog smiled. Oh, I'm certain we've not seen the last of each other, Molly Cloverall. He raised his hand in farewell and walked off toward Port Riverton. With a loud sigh, I took my first step in the Darklands, and Guests followed. Without speaking to each other, we continued on our way. Well, that wasn't a very long chapter, so I'm going to go ahead and throw in chapter 8 as well, okay? At first, the Darklands seemed no different than Mirkwood, but as Guest and I walked farther, a mist like a fallen cloud settled over us. Moisture clung in drops to trees and ferns. Color faded into shades of gray, dull, and dreary. It was as something dark ran under the surface of this land and leaked into the light. I couldn't see it, or taste it, or touch it, but I felt it. The close, damp air made me weary. My feet grew so heavy I could barely lift one and put it in front of the other. Guest lagged behind, whimpering to himself. Too tired to walk farther, I sat down and rested my back against a boulder. Guest squatted beside me. Without saying a word, he picked up a stick and drew squiggly shapes in the dirt. Do you remember anything about the Darklands? I asked. Guest didn't answer. He found a beetle and was trying to make it climb up his stick. I didn't think he'd even heard me. I nudged his hand and he dropped the stick. Don't scare Bug, Molly. I asked you what you remember about this place. Is it always this gray and damp? Do fierce animals live here? Will they hurt us? Guest watched the beetle crawl over his toes. Music. I remember music. Sad music. Pretty music. They danced. Did they teach you the song you sing? Guest wrinkled his forehead and thought. Ma'am sing that song. My ma'am? My ma'am. Not to me, but I listens. He picked up the beetle and cupped it gently in his hands. My ma'am not like me. Scream. Hit. Hurt me. Raising his head, he looked at me. Molly's ma'am feed me, but doesn't like me. You doesn't like me. For a moment he looked sad, but then he smiled at the beetle perched on his thumb. Bugs like me. My dog likes me. I looked at Guest, really looked at him. Something I hadn't ever done. He was still an ugly little thing, no argument there. His skin was pale, his mouth wide and thin-lipped, his teeth small and crooked as a row of pebbles. Fly-away yellow hair hung in his eyes and straggled down his neck. But the biggest change was his size. Surely he'd grown faster than a human baby. He was still scrawny and bow-legged, but he was already the size of a 5-year-old. He stopped hitting and biting. He ate regular food. He trudged along on his 2 feet, and he seemed to talk better every day. I watched him play with the beetle. How gentle he was. A village boy would most likely torment a beetle. He'd pull off its wings and legs, maybe even step on it and laugh. I'd seen them do it just to make the girls scream. But not Guest. He looked up at me as if he sensed I was watching him. I pointed at the beetle. Your bug is sitting on your nose now. Doesn't that tickle? Guest looked cross-eyed at the bug. He laughed and moved the little creature to a patch of moss. We watched it crawl into the ferns. Bug go home, he said. We go home? When we find Thomas. I stood up and shouldered my pack. As dusk darkened into night, we made beds for ourselves in a tree's cradle of roots. Guest gathered wood, and I used my flint to light a fire. By the time we'd eaten our meal of cheese, bread, and an apple each, it was full night. In the dark lands, that meant black, in a way night never was in Lower Hexham. The ever-present mist hid the stars and the moon, and the trees wove themselves together, trunk and limb, into a black wall. Look there, Guest pointed. Something coming. Lights, I whispered. Dozens of them. What is it? Guest pulled me down beside him. Hide! But I want to see. I stood up. The lights twinkled like fireflies, but as they came closer, they were more like tiny lanterns, dancing back and forth, swinging this way and that, now lighting the ground, now lighting the trees with a strange greenish glow. Look, Guest, aren't they beautiful? Guest tugged me so hard I toppled down beside him. Do what my dogs say. Listen, Molly, they come for you. Even though I longed to stand up and watch them, I crouched beside him. The lights looked harmless enough, but I promised my dog I'd listen to Guest. As the lights came closer, I saw the creatures holding lanterns. They weren't as pretty as I expected them to be. Wearing tattered leaves and cobwebs, they were wrinkled like old men and women. The air around them echoed with their cries, a high-pitched whine that buzzed in my head and made it impossible to think. Molly! 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 They cried. Come with us. We have a surprise for you. Something you long for. Something dear to you. Your heart's desire. Come. Come. Guest grabbed my hand and held tight. Tricks and lies. No, listen. Cover ears. I tried to pull away, crazy now to follow them. Sure, they'd lead me to Thomas, but Guest had grown stronger. I could not break his grip on me. All at once, they surrounded us, hundreds of them, no bigger than wasps. They dazzled our eyes with their lanterns and deafened us with their cries. No longer pretending to be friendly, they pinched, they bit, they pulled our hair as if they meant to yank it out. They tore our clothes as if they wished to strip us to our bare skin. We swatted them, but they swarmed around us like midges. We could do nothing to drive them away or to protect ourselves. "Locket!" Gus screamed. In desperation, I yanked the chain from my dress and thrust it into their midst. At its touch, the creatures shrieked in pain and spiraled upward. In seconds, they vanished into the darkness of trees. "Tinies. Kind folks send them," Gus said. "They leads you into swamps and drowns you." I'd never seen them before, but Dado has. He calls them the will-o'-wisp or hinky punks. "Could you listen to me this time?" I should have thanked him, but I didn't want him to think too much of himself. He was right this time, but maybe not always. In the morning, I filled the water jug from a stream, and we trudged deeper into the gloomy forest. A crow watched us from a high branch and then flew away silently. I saw him vanish into the gloom, most likely on his way to tell the kind folk where we were. Remember, they said that birds were messengers, like between the humans and the kind folk. They were kind of like spies. Gus plodded beside me, his skinny arms swinging by his side, his head down, his ears red from the tinies' bites. "How much farther is it?" I asked. "Far," he said. "Or not far. You sound like my dog. My dog knows more than me, much more than you. That's because you're a changeling and I'm not." We walked on through the endless dim forest. Tree roots humped and twisted across the path, reaching out like long arms and fingers to trip us. Mist clung to our skin and hair, soaking our clothing and all our belongings. It was a wonder Guest and I weren't covered with moss like the trees and the rocks. No matter how many miles we traveled, we saw no sign of the kind folk. Sometimes we heard distant laughter, sometimes music, but we couldn't tell where it came from. The wind blew oddly, now this way, now that, and the leaves slithered overhead like snakes. Exhausted, I leaned on a stout stick I found along the way. My boots pinched my toes and blistered my heels. My pack chafed my shoulders and weighed too much for the little it held. Pulling out the water jug, I drank and handed it to Guest. "Not too much," I warned. "We haven't crossed a stream for miles." Guest gulped and then passed the jug back to me. His ears twitched like a rabbit's. "Listen, something's coming." Guest had no sooner warned me than I heard a loud rustling in the ferns. They swayed as if the wind were blowing, and out stepped a person I never expected to see in the Darklands. "Well, well," Granny Hedgepath said. "Whom do I see but Molly Cloverall from Lower Hexham?" I stared at her, speechless with surprise. She laughed and came close enough for me to smell her familiar odor of smoke and damp earth and herbs. "What's wrong, girl? Cat got your tongue?" "Granny," I stammered, "what are you doing here?" For the first time ever, I was glad to see her. "Why, you'll never know where I'll turn up," she said. "I'm a wanderer, I am. I go here and there and everywhere." Gus squeezed my hand as if he were scared. "You remember Granny," I said to him. "She lives on the other side of Cattail Hill, not far from Mam and Dado." He said nothing, but his face screwed up like he smelled something bad. Ducking behind my skirt, he peered at her. Granny had that effect on people, I thought, scaring them with her strange ways and words, but meeting her here in the Darklands seemed like good luck. Perhaps she'd seen something that would help us. "You've done what you said you'd do," Granny said. "I thought it were a foolish boast from a foolish girl, but here you be far from home and it's still with you." I have not found... Oh, there's a caterpillar. Hold on. Okay, it's actually not a caterpillar. It looks like one, but it's called an asp. And their skin, their little spikes touch you, it makes you break out in a rash. So that's the first one I've seen this season. So I'm sorry that I stopped, but yeah, I don't want that thing on me. But it's going away. It's crawling off the picnic table. So I'm sorry, let me find back to where we're, let's see. Okay, here we go. I've not found the kind folk yet. Do you know where they hide themselves? Indeed I do. They've been helping me find my roots and berries. She held up the basket she carried, and I saw a heap of dead plants. Her wrinkled face split into a grin. Come with me, the two of you, and I'll take you to them. Did you see Thomas? Is he well? Oh, he's very well indeed. Those ones take good care of him. Yes, they do. And I've taken good care of Guest. See how he's grown? He walks and talks now. Oh, yes, she cut in. But he's what he is, ain't he? And will always be. She spat on the ground almost at Guest's feet. You done wasted your time dragging him along with you. They've got no use for his kind. I held Guest's hand tighter. Will the kind folk give me Thomas? Well, you just come along with me, Molly. I'll take you straight to the Queen herself, and she'll give you Thomas. Yes, indeed she will. Oh, yes, indeed. Granny laughed and clapped her hands. Guest whimpered and tugged at my skirt. Embarrassed, I swatted his hands away. Don't be rude, Guest. Say hello to Granny. Show her how much you've learned. Guest hid his face in my skirt and said not a word. Granny laughed. He ain't no different, just bigger. She reached for my hand. Come along with me if you want to see Thomas. I ain't got all day. Guest tried to pull me away from Granny. I bent to look at his face. What's wrong with you? He shook his head and pointed at Granny. The old woman laughed again. He don't like me, do he? He's just tired as I am. We've come so far. That you have, but come along with me. Soon you'll have your Thomas and be rid of that one and on your way home. With Guest trying to hold me back, I trudged into the ferns after Granny. How is Ma'am? I asked her. And Daddo? Did he come back? Do they miss me? Are they worried? Hush, child, everything is fine. Your father's home and your mother's a-blooming with health. Happy they are that the changeling is gone, but sad to lose both their children. I took Guest's hand and tried to tow him after me, but he dug his heels into the earth and refused to move. It's all right, I whispered to him. She's taking us to the kind folk. Be nice, Guest. Granny smiled at me. I never noticed what a foxy grin she had. Perhaps I'd not seen a smile on her grumpy face before now. Thomas will be right happy to see you, Molly, that he will, and the kind folk too. Such a brave girl to come all this way, yes indeed. They've got a grand feast all ready for you. It was odd, but the more Granny talked, the less I understood. Her words became a stream of water running over smooth stones, soothing but senseless. After what seemed miles, we came to a hollow in the ferns. Granny's endless talking had made me dizzy. I swayed on my feet, feeling as if I could barely stand. Oh, dear me, Molly, look at you. You're about to topple over. Granny helped me sit down in the ferns. Rest you right here. I'll go fetch Thomas. Before she left, she took a pretty little blue bottle out of her basket. This is my elixir of health, she said. Drink it, and you'll soon feel fit to greet Thomas. I took the bottle eagerly, thirstier than I'd ever been in my life. Thank you, I whispered. I'll be back in a thrice. With a laugh, Granny disappeared into the ferns. I pulled out the stopper and lifted the bottle to my lips, but before I took one sip, Guest leapt out of the ferns and knocked the bottle out of my hand. Its contents poured onto the ground. Although Guest tried to shoo it away, a butterfly dipped down to drink from the puddle of elixir. In a moment it lay still and the ferns around it withered. I stared at the dead butterfly, my head spinning with thirst. Surely Granny never meant to poison me. The kind folk must have tricked her. Guest shook his head. She not Granny. Kind folk magic. Why didn't you tell me? He pointed to his mouth. Granny, take my words. I pulled you. I tugged you. I made faces. But... He shrugged. I bowed my head and started to cry. Oh, Guest, I believed her. I thought she'd bring Thomas. I was sure she would. He began pulling and tugging at me again. Not safe. Not safe here. We go back to path. Staggering to my feet, I ran with Guest, but the path wasn't where we thought it should be. In growing fear, we pushed through tall grasses and stumbled into bogs, sinking ankle deep, sometimes knee deep, before we pulled our feet free. We made our way through clumps of heather that clung to our ankles and tripped us. I lost my walking stick and almost left a boot in a bog. Strange voices called our names. Muffled by dense gray air, they seemed to surround us, but we couldn't tell where they came from or how close they were. Midges with bites as sharp as the tiniest teeth swarmed around us. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, Guest cried out, Molly, the path! The path! I see it! I stumbled out of the woods behind Guest. The white stones bordering the path glowed softly in the dusk. The voices calling us faded into the distance. For now, at least, we were safe. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 7 and 8, which means on Monday we'll get started with chapter 9. I want to say thank you for making it through another week. Make sure that you're logging into the district's website, going into Clever, going into BrainPop, into Mayan, into, what was the other one I put lessons in? Mayan, BrainPop, and into Flipgrid. I will have more lessons up ready on Monday so that you will have new work to do if you've already completed the other work. If you haven't completed the other work, you can complete that first. If you have questions, please have your parents or yourself dojo me, and I will do my very best I can to help you guys. Bye for now, and I'll see you guys next week. Miss you.